Hey guys, hoping all is well with everybody. In this video we're going to be continuing the read-along story of The Heroic Dogs by Aloud Jefferson. And in this video we're going to be continuing on with part 2 of the story of Bothy with Ranulph and Virginia Fiennes. So this is part 2. Antarctica. Bothy's job on the expedition was to be with Guinea at all the base camps. He and Guinea were flown to the Borga base camp and helped assemble the cardboard buildings and radio antennas. The three men on the ice team traveled there by snowmobile from the ship's landing site. From early January to October 28th, they lived in the cardboard buildings. At night, the temperature on the floor dropped to 5 degrees Fahrenheit. They slept on the platforms near the ceiling where the temperature was a balmy 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Rand built ice tunnels connecting the buildings so they minimized the time they were exposed to the cold air. Guinea was claustrophobic, so there were no tunnels to the radio hut. There were too many exposed wires in the radio hut, so at first Bothy stayed most of the time in the man hut with Burton, who was expedition cook. Burton complained in his diary about Guinea taking Bothy on the expedition, but leaving him alone all day for him to take care of. However, Burton seemed amused as he played catch with Bothy several hours a day. Later, Guinea kept Bothy in a shed during the day. They had to be careful not to let Bothy go outside. Wind chill could be as severe as minus 110 degrees Fahrenheit and kill the little dog in minutes. When Bothy did venture out, he was bundled in a red polar suit, boots, and had head cover that had left just his eyes and mouth exposed. In the buildings, Bothy continued to refuse guidance in where he deposited his gifts, presenting one in Burton's boot once. Rand's job was cleaning, so he hunted for Bothy's deposits every day. They had been together from early January to October 1981, when the three men left to climb the mountain in front of them and continue crossing Antarctica. It was minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit the morning they left. Simon, who had been down at Fiennes, moved in with Guinea and Bothy to run the generators. When the men reached McMurdo Station on the other side of the continent, Guinea and Bothy flew to be there when they arrived. Bothy had to be kept outside in the separate tent to avoid his contact with the sled dogs there to avoid passing any outside viruses to them. In 1993, dogs were permanently banned from Antarctica as canine distemper was infecting the seals. After waiting for their ship to arrive, it took on the charter business when not needed for the expedition to add some revenue. The team was off again, this time up the Pacific Ocean to Alaska's Yukon River. They stopped in Sydney, Australia for Bothy to meet Prince Charles. One hot day they stopped the ship and they all, including Bothy, had a swim. Arctic. They reached the Yukon River June 30th, 1981. In the Arctic, Guinea had to move her base camps to keep in touch by radio with Rand. Sometimes they were in small settlements, sometimes in deserted cabins alone. One base camp she ran from a garage/inn. To pay for a room and telephone service, she waited tables and washed dishes. At one time, the shed they used to store spare snowmobiles, equipment, and fuel caught fire and everything was lost. The most idyllic spot was Tanquary Camp. They were alone at the end of August 1981, with 2 dogs now. Guinea had rescued Tugalak, a pup she rescued from the Inuits. They were going to kill it as there was a surplus of dogs there. It had been a tiny black thing when she first got it, but she was soon quite large. Bothy loved her. At Tanquary, they chased after hares, observed closely by wolves. Rand couldn't decide if the wolves thought the dogs would taste good or if they were just curious, but several adults with their pups often stayed close to the hut. They wintered at Alert, Canada. Alert is the most northern point with year-round inhabitants. The inhabitants are temporarily military and scientific staff for the radio and weather operations there. Rand and Burton left on February 13th by snowmobile. They reached the North Pole on April 10th, 1982. They were on the ice floe that was getting slushy. Bothy arrived by plane and showed his interest by nearly peeing on the Union Jack they'd planted. Just a few days later, a plane with tourists landed at the same spot on the floe and sank. This was the end of Bothy's expedition. Both he and Tugalac were flown to England for a 6-month quarantine. Bothy's biggest contribution was being his yappy, silly self, bolstering the spirits of everyone on the expedition. They laughed at his running away fearfully from his first penguin. They admired his nonchalance with the wolves and his bravery in facing the moose. He and Guinea both believed they'd seen ghosts. Bothy was the first and only dog to touch the poles. It cannot be repeated as dogs are now banned at the South Pole. Ran and Guinea wrote a book, Bothy, the Polar Dog, of the dog's exploits with them. Bothy was named Dog of the Year by the UK Kennel Club. Guinea bred Tugalac and apparently started a new breed with several descendants. The scary parts for Ran. In Antarctica, it was the fields of crevices, any one which could swallow them whole. It was tricky timing the trip. They needed daylight, and it had to warm up enough so they wouldn't freeze to death. But as the sun rose higher, the snow and ice that bridged the crevices evaporated, increasing the danger of falling into them. The Arctic was the most grueling and the most dangerous part of the expedition. While they had snowmobiles, they didn't just rev them up and ride off to the pole. They were huge blocks of ice, much thick like tables on an end. They were 45 to 40 feet high. They had to use their axes to cut most of their way to the North Pole. And they were over open seas riding on blocks of ice. One time, Ran fell into the water, which could have easily killed him. He managed to crawl back onto the ice, and Burton found him to erect a makeshift tent and warm him up. The most harrowing part of the trip was after they'd reached the pole and started towards the Atlantic Ocean. Ice was breaking apart. The trick was to find a large floe and camp on it at just the right time so the currents would propel them east. They found a floe and pitched their tents. As the weather warmed, there were calls from England to abort the trip before the floe broke up and they'd be lost. One day they lost two acres from their floe. Then it got so slushy they had to wear hip boots to walk on the solid parts of it. Large lakes formed. Then polar bears started visiting every day. But after 3 months on the ice floe, they made it. They reached the ship on August 4th and were back in Greenwich on August 29th after Rand's traveling about 52,000 miles over 3 years. Rand has gone on adventures, losing many fingertips on one of them. Guinea became the first woman to belong to the Antarctic Club and received the Polar Medal from the Queen. She died at 56 in the year 2004. And that is the end of the story of Bothy with Ranulph and Virginia Fiennes. I hope you guys enjoyed that story, and I hope to look forward to seeing you guys in our next story called Chips and the Wrens. But I hope you guys again enjoyed this story, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for watching. Take good care. Bye.